Welcome to Theme Park Academy, brought to you by blooloop. Please be sure to check out blooloop.com for all the latest news and information on the attractions industry. Mark, who do we have this week?
So, in this episode, we're diving into the world of theme park operations, training, and opening new destinations in new emerging markets. And there's no better guest to have on than Greg Pearn.
Let's get to it.
Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We're really excited to hear about the work that you've done and the work that you're doing at the moment. But can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and let everyone know what you've been doing over the past couple of years?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, caveat, I'm a theme park geek, right? So I for the last 25 years, I've been really lucky in that I've not really gone to work. I've gone to play. And I've been really fortunate throughout my career to do, jobs that I just, what I wanted to do when I was at school, right? When I wanted to do when I was a young kid. So I kind of been doing that. I started off back in the UK in the 90s. Actually, no, when I left school, I went into engineering. I was a maintenance engineer. I did an apprenticeship. And the reason I did that was because I back in my day, the careers advisor was awful, right? So when you go to the careers advisor and you say, well, actually, I want to work in theme parks, they go, oh, what's a theme park? And it was like, well, actually, you should probably, you want to work on rides. Well, then you should probably be an engineer. And I was a very kind of hands-on. I love technology. I love science. I love taking things apart and rebuilding things. So that was kind of like a natural route for me. So I kind of went in that direction. But my first real taste of kind of the industry per se, apart from being a visitor, would be when I started working for an aquarium in the UK. You'll know it, Mark, Blue Planet Aquarium. And I was a friend of mine had just started working there as the marketing manager. She was a marketing manager at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, and I knew her through the Pleasure Beach. And she went there and she phoned me up one day, said, "Hey, Greg, do you want to come and work in an aquarium?" And I'm like, "Okay, I've got no marketing experience. I've done stuff. I've done publications and stuff, as my hobby, but I've never actually done marketing or trained for marketing. So I kind of jumped in at the deep end, and it was absolutely fantastic. I went into a business that was a little bit challenged back then. It opened with high expectations, and the visit volume wasn't necessarily coming through. And as somebody that spent all their time going to theme parks and attractions, I just came with like an absolute brain full of ideas. So they thought I was fantastic because I was just kind of often just stating the obvious, right? Why did we do this? And it was just stuff I'd seen elsewhere, and so kind of I did really well. And of course, I had a passion for it. I had a passion for the product. I loved the business. I loved working in the marketing department, and then obviously doing operations there as well, and working with the team there who are absolutely fantastic. And I kind of that's how I kind of got into the industry in the marketing side of things. And then, I left there to go and do a startup in North Wales for a science discovery centre of all things, which kind of looked really exciting. It was a partnership between a university and the Welsh Assembly government, and again, my science background, my marketing background. So I went to be marketing manager there. And then by the time I left there, I was the kind of like the center manager, and we'd opened this science center in partnership with Techniquest from Cardiff. And we made it a really successful business, delivering fantastic engagement to wannabe engineers and mathematicians and scientists across North Wales and Northwest England. It was really kind of a rewarding job. And then I got headhunted by Merlin, so I jumped over to Merlin, worked in the Blackpool cluster. I chose to go there. I was offered a couple of opportunities actually with them, and then I always remember it. I remember it really clearly. I mean, for those of you that know Alton Towers, I was actually at Alton Towers the day I got the call to say, well, actually, they wanted me to work for them. I'd literally just walked out of the Sea Life Centre at Alton Towers, and I was kind of making my way over to the Rapids ride. So, if you know the park, you know which direction I'd been traveling, and the recruiter from Merlin said, right, okay, we've got a couple of positions for you. There's a general manager position open here. There's a general manager position open up in Loch Lomond. And then there's a job that you probably won't want, but I'll tell you about it anyway. And it was operations manager for Sea Life Blackpool. And I just said, I'll take it. I'll go there. Because, I knew at the time, I knew that, what was going to happen with Blackpool, with the clustering of attractions, Merlin taking over the kind of the leisure parks assets, and how that was going to work with, the council making that acquisition there and Merlin being the operator. So I thought, right, well, this is the best time to be in Merlin and the best time to be in Blackpool, a place that I knew incredibly well because, I spent a lot of my weekends at the Pleasure Beach. So yeah, that's how I started working for Merlin. Then I rose through the ranks at Merlin, and then I got headhunted to go and work in Dubai for Dubai Parks and Resorts. So I went and did that, opened part of the opening team that opened the resort over in Dubai. And then one of my boss at the time, Brian, he got headhunted to go, and he actually got headhunted by two companies, one for Six Flags in China and one for Genting Malaysia. And I remember him coming to me one day and saying, which one should I do, right? Where should I go? And I'm thinking, you're going to come with me, right? And I was like, selfishly, I'd never been to China, right? I'd done Singapore, had friends in Singapore, had good friends in Singapore. And I thought, yeah, Malaysia, Singapore, I've been to Malaysia. Man, you got to choose Malaysia, right? Malaysia's the place to be. And so he came over to Resorts World Genting, and then I followed him a few months later, and then I stayed there for 5 years. He left after a year and a half. He went over to do stuff in the Saudi. He was working on the Neon project, and now he's part president for Six Flags Qiddiya. So I did Genting, and then I moved over from Genting to Vietnam. I worked for Sun Group on Sun World Parks. And now I'm working for a UK company launching a hospitality kind of attraction, which is kind of pivoting off the back of the whole competitive socializing genre at the moment, where people go and do experience dining, where you participate in a group, do an activity, and then you eat, you drink, you eat some more, you drink some more, you play some games. So we're launching that in Southeast Asia in the next couple of months, and got some other sites, globally that we're working on at the moment. So it's same but different,
Yeah.
So that's kind of my career in a nutshell, really. Hope that wasn't too long for you.
No, it was great. I think we.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay. And I think you said it all. I think one thing that you said at the beginning was about the passion that you had for the roles that you've been in, obviously the passion, and it shows through when you're talking about the different roles that you've had, and obviously working in Europe, Asia, and Middle East. What's kept your passion going over all of that time?
Oh God, the industry. It's just the best industry to be in. I know it's cliche and we all say it, right? And you hear it whenever you engage with other people that are in the industry, those that have been in the industry a long time, and those that have just joined it. You go to the trade shows and you meet people that are there for the first time and going, wow, this is such a great bunch of people, right? It's such an amazing industry to be a part of. It's so much fun. But I think that's a big part of it. It's like, I said at the beginning, I don't go to work. I go to work, obviously, but I don't go to work in the sense that, I'm not doing a 9 to 5, sat at my desk, looking at my watch, thinking, what time is it? 5 o'clock. I'm out of here, right? I really am just captivated by it, and captivated by, the people that we meet and the products that we get to experience, the places we get to go. It's such an amazing industry because, if you're a generalist like me, there's just so many aspects that you can engage with, from technology to ride hardware to shows to F&B to corporate hospitality to strategic business planning. There's just so many aspects that are part of, of what we do. So I just find it all fascinating, and as I've worked through my career, I've chosen different aspects of the industry to do, as I've worked kind of way up the ladder, really, and that's what's kept me going. And there's I've been really fortunate that I've kind of jumped from project to project, that's always kept me excited, and there's been challenges, there's been opportunities, and it just keeps you going, right? I'm genuinely appreciative of what I've done so far and how lucky I've been. Yeah, really am.
Well, and with you going kind of everywhere in the world almost, you've seen a lot of different operations. When you go to someplace and you're starting things up, what is one of the first things you assess, or how do you start that process? What do you think the key things are as you look at a new business or look taking over a business?
Yeah, do you know what? It depends on I guess at what point you enter that startup, right? I mean, I've done startups from scratch. I'm doing a startup from scratch now, right? So you can influence that product. You can influence the business from day one. But equally, I've stepped into businesses that are already been started up, right? And it's like, it's in some cases it's like, oh my God, what do I do with this, right? How do I fix this problem, And they all bring their different challenges. But I guess my role has always been, well, understand the product, right? What is the product? What is the goal? What is it we're actually trying to deliver here? What do we want to be tomorrow, right? Where do we want to be in a year's time, And then working backwards from that and building the structure, the business, the people that you need to get you where you essentially need to be. If it's a brand new startup, then you build the team from scratch. If you've got the experience like me, then you bring in the processes, the procedures, the documentation that's worked for you well previously, right? And you adapt it or tweak it to the new environment, to the new project. But if you're going into a business that's already established and operating, and you've got to take it in a different direction or add new components to it, then you assess what you've got. You spend that time, and I've learned the hard way. You have to spend that time to understand who's in your business. What tools you've got, what the capabilities of your talent pool. And see what you need to plug the gaps and see, start thinking about how you can strategically take the people you want to take with you, right? Take them on a journey, show them what the end game could look like if we all work together and worked hard to achieve it, Yeah, it varies, and that's what I genuinely find exciting. I always say to people when I get approached with new ideas or new projects, the first thing I think, well, is it going to be easy, right? And if it's going to be easy, I'm probably going to be bored. So I'm like, nah, I'm all right, I'm good. Now if it's going to be a challenge, it's exciting, then it's something that I would consider. Yeah.
I mean, you work kind of all over the globe, and we have a lot of new parks opening around the world right now. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing, you think, from an operational standpoint, where whether they're not used to amusement parks traditionally in their culture, or just these huge new parks opening up in areas that may not have the resources for them yet? What are some things that you've seen or hurdles you've overcome in your career?
Education. I remember when we opened Dubai Parks and Resorts, there were parks already in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, obviously in the United Emirates, but we were recruiting a lot of people from outside the region, right? The talent pool within the UAE was quite limited, and obviously, we had agreements with other operators that we couldn't literally take all their talent, because what are they going to do, right, to survive? So we were looking globally for our team, and I remember when we were recruiting in Eastern Europe and in Africa and what have you, and in the Philippines, it was you were engaging with people that had never been to a theme park. They didn't know what a theme park was. So you had to start with the education process. Show them examples of kind of what we're trying to achieve in Dubai, and what a theme park is, what roller coasters are, what carousels are, what entertainment looks like, what employees look like, what's expected of an employee, because the last thing you want to do is missell a proposition and they do 2 weeks and then they're gone, right? So education was really key for us. And then of course, if you're working in a multicultural environment, we invested so much time and effort in appreciating everybody's culture. one of the things I absolutely adored about working in Dubai is that, at one point on my team alone, we had, I think it was 21 different nationalities, in a team of 100, right? That's big,
That's really cool.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
My assistant manager at the time, she was absolutely fantastic, Hind. She, I remember the kind of the culture wall that she built. We had a wall dedicated in the office, and it was literally, it was a wall with all the different countries where everybody came from, and what was special about each of those countries, so that everybody could learn about each other and understand that, well, actually, maybe there's something that's acceptable in your country is not quite acceptable in their country, and take people along for that, that education, because again, in some cases you're taking people straight out of high school or college, and education in different countries varies considerably, so it's that's a big challenge, but we built a fantastic team, because they all appreciated each other, and the stories that they had from their hometowns, and their families, and their countries. That was for me was an eye opener for me, having only ever worked in the UK and Europe, where it's quite siloed, to go into that kind of environment and have literally 21 different cultures. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And all those different languages as well, by the way, all those different languages. There was the common language, English, but it was sometimes it would get a bit of a challenge. I remember now, thinking back, that you would have your Filipino team would be speaking in their language, the Emiratis would be speaking. You had to keep reminding people, right, guys, when we're in business, when we're all in the office together, we speak English, right? So that you just you're all, we're one team, right? You can hear each other, but not only just to make sure people weren't gossiping and all that sort of stuff, but just the people that could engage in that conversation, right? They weren't left out, So as much as we had 21 countries, nationalities, some of those countries might only have two or one person. So it was about trying to make everybody feel welcome and everybody feel part of that team.
And how did you work with that to kind of get all those different cultures to gel together as a team, coming from very different backgrounds?
We set rules. We set rules. Like I said, the common language was English. So when you're in that space, you all spoke English. We tried to stop people forming their own little cliques of own nationality, which very, very difficult to do, and it happened. But we tried to do that. And like I said, we did a lot of education. We did a lot of team building. We did a lot of work as a team. Just to make sure everybody felt that they were treated equally and respected equally, no matter where they were from or what they believed in. And everybody, people respected that. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's incredibly rewarding when you see your team come together and you see your team doing really good things. Really, really is rewarding. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I guess the flip side of that, looking on the customer service side, how do you take a team like that, who again come from various backgrounds, may not be used to our industry? How do you get them to sort of coalesce around great guest experience, great guest service?
Yeah, it's difficult, because we learned the hard way. Because again, you're engaging with people that don't know what great guest experience is. So you have to define that culture. You have to define those service standards, and you have to give them tangible examples of what that looks like, right? So we had opportunities in the UAE to take our team to other parks to show them good service. We did a lot of team building exercises. We tried not to lecture people, right? We tried to motivate people and encourage conversation, right, and take them along with you for the ride. I remember we would do it, and Hind was fantastic at this. We would celebrate wins. We would celebrate success. We would celebrate when team got it right. And we wouldn't dwell on moments when maybe we didn't quite get it right. We would learn from it, and and created an environment where it was okay for them to talk about it, right, and to acknowledge it, and to look at how we do tomorrow better. I've been in environments before where people are absolutely, they're afraid to tell them that the managers or their senior leaders anything, because the repercussions that happen because of that. So we were really, really conscious to avoid all of that and build a really strong culture of celebrating the success and learning from the less successful things that we did. And there was lots of it. Yeah.
And when you're pulling that team together, how do you think about, I think, sort of our global standards that we work to create as an industry, but also local expectations or local culture? Where do you start to kind of pull those two together to make sure that you're delivering great service, but also respecting, understanding local culture and custom?
Yeah, I mean, if you're an outsider, if you're an expat like me, and I've been an expat for the last 10, 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing you do is you learn the culture, right? You learn the people that you're working with. You understand their culture. You adapt to their culture. You don't go in there with a, I'm an expat, I know what I'm on about, I've done all this before, blah blah blah, and create this resentment. You get to know them. You get to know what makes them tick. You get to know, how their world operates. Because often it's very different to your world. And their circumstances are very different to you.
Mm-hmm.
When I started at Genting, I came into an established business. It was a phenomenal operation. The group, the resort that I worked at, we had 14,000 employees. My team, when I started, we had 200 legacy employees. From the operations that we closed down, and we're working across the business still. And they had their way of doing things that had always been their way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
So you've heard it all before, right? It's like, well, we've always done it that way. So
Yep.
that was a really big challenge, and you'll always find people that quite quickly cotton on to the fact, hey, these guys are great, right? We can really learn something from these. I'm really excited about what they bring to the table. And then you'll find people that are less responsive, and it's in you know where to focus your energy, really, and try to mix things up a little bit, so you get you align people with good mentors, and help get that to support. But I was really lucky with Genting, for example, because I had the opportunity to work with some good people that were already there, but also bring in good people as well to support me. And that really helped. So you talk about standards and industry best practice. We built a really good team in Malaysia that had people from all the different operating backgrounds. Universal, Morale. Merlin, obviously. We had a really good, strong team of different ideas. Different ways of best practice in their own business in their own right, and we created a hybrid out of that. I was very mindful not to stamp me on it and say, look, this is what I've done before, here's my operating manual from XYZ, this is how we're going to do it. I quickly recognized where the strong talent was, and we made a hybrid of that to deliver best in practice. That was a really good opportunity for us there. Yeah.
And when you think about like kind of best practice and opening, what do you think are sort of some must-haves on a pre-opening operational checklist? What are some of the big things that when you're like, oh, we got to get this done? What are your 5 things or 3 things you're like, I just have to have this in place so we can't have that soft opening or even talk about it?
You remind me now of a conversation my COO had with me back in Ghent, and I remember we weren't far off our original opening day, and he said, well, where's your pre-opening checklist, right, of readiness? And I'm like, oh, I haven't got one, right? It's in here. We just know what to do, right? And I think, I mean, he was a very data-driven person, right? He liked checklists and data for everything. So I should have preempted that in reality, but it was safety. Safety is always your number one. If something isn't safe, then you don't open, you don't do it. that's always number one. But if you're talking theme parks, it's getting those technical rehearsals out of the way. It's having that opportunity to rehearse, learn, test, adjust, and doing that for as long as you can do it, that makes sense, that you've proven all your systems, your procedures, your policies are all working, you've proven that your team are trained, that the sign-offs have been done correctly, that you've gone in and you've audited them for quality and for delivering what you expect them to deliver, and that your show readiness is great. You just that your product's exactly where it needs to be for opening, because I've learned the hard way in other projects that I've done, that you only get one stab at opening, you only get one opening day, and and people hold you to that, and they always they will always remember that the day you opened, as of course everybody that's in the park remembers it, because it's often the best day. You work so hard. You've worked so hard to get to that moment, it happens, and then the next day is like, well, anticlimax, right? The real, yeah. There's so many components. I couldn't give you 5, because
sure.
there's 500. It goes right. I mean, it'll depend on what position you are in the business as well, right? And but for me, it's always been, if it's not safe, we don't open. If the show quality, if the product's not where it needs to be, and it's not aligned with expectations of your consumer, then you've got a big problem.
I think with that as well, I'd love to know, you did kind of mention that you've learned the hard way, and without going into too much detail, because I wouldn't put that pressure on you, I'd love to hear some of the challenges that you have had when you've been opening a park, and kind of how you've adapted in the moment and how you overcome them.
Yeah, I mean, can I say COVID? I guess.
Sure.
I mean, I'll say COVID because I had this project in Malaysia, and we were opening Genting Skyworld, which for those of you that know about that park, it had quite a history behind it, and we were finally getting ready for an opening in August 2020, right? And we were working towards that, and everything was kind of, the pipeline said that was going to happen. And then obviously beginning of 2020, COVID hit us, and we didn't actually open until February 2022. So an 18-month delay, and by the time COVID hit us, we were already, we had quite a good headcount on board, we were cycling attractions, we went into lockdown, and that was a challenge nobody could have anticipated, so that was something that we really had to work hard, and every day, and especially in Southeast Asia, every day was different, because the advice kept changing, and how we had to adapt to that was quite significant, especially when you're 6,000 feet up a mountain, and your employees live on site, and then I think at that time, I think within my division then, I mean, within the resort, we had 14,000 employees at the time, and about 10,000 actually staying on site. We had to, one day we were opening, the next day we were closed, and we had to literally rethink everything about what we knew about our business and what we knew about our operation to adapt to that, and the theme park was the same. So that was a massive challenge that we ultimately pulled through. But any opening, any project, any opening, soft opening, whatever, just you learn to expect the unexpected, right? You can plan. You can have all the mitigation in place to kind of, the backup plans, and you've rehearsed it, and you've done absolutely everything you think you can do to be successful on that day. And, it happens, right? something was going to spawn. I remember when we finally did open Genting Skyworld, we had, on paper, we had an attraction count of 19, right? But the reality is we were going to open with 12, and we'd done everything that we thought we possibly could do to manage expectations. We'd pushed everybody into pre-purchase so we could manage capacity. We'd sent out email blasts to everybody so they knew what was going to be open on that day, But we had one ride in particular, which was a roller coaster, and it was literally touch and go whether it would be open on that day. And, we wanted it, obviously we all wanted it to be open. But at the end of the day, sadly, we missed it by, a couple of days. It came online a couple of days after our soft opening date. And that was a disappointment for us, obviously, as a team, because our product wasn't as complete as we wanted it to be. But of course, it was a disappointment for guests, even though we told guests that ride, wouldn't be available. They saw it cycling because we were working as hard as we could to, keep cycling and iron out the problems that we had with it to get it open. So it meant operating while we had guests in the park. So. Yeah, but you work through it. You guess recovery. You educate. You explain. You do what you need to do to try and to make sure people leave with that smile on their face. And show empathy that you appreciate their position and you care about their opinion.
No, absolutely. And looking at that from the opening of a park or the opening of a new venture, how do you build a leadership team that is kind of ready to scale and sustain that operation after opening? Because again, there's so much focus on getting the park open and the training before that, but how do you sustain and how do you kind of plan that sustained growth within the team?
Oh, it's hard. I mean, obviously, you do all your analytics, right? You understand how many staff, how many team you're going to need, right? You understand what that support structure looks like: team leaders, supervisors, managers, directors, vice presidents, etc., assistant vice president, and you build a structure to operate the product, like I said at the beginning, to operate the product safely and to the levels of quality and service delivery that you want to do it. And then in terms of the team itself, if you're starting from scratch, recruitment, right? But you get to a point where you know what you can spot a good candidate, right? You don't always get it right, but in most times, most cases you can spot a good candidate. At Genting, I was lucky enough to bring on people that I'd worked with before, or people that I had associated with in the industry that I knew, could tick the boxes that we needed to tick there. We built a really strong team to be able to deliver that opening, because it came with some quite significant challenges. One thing I'm incredibly proud of with that project is that we delivered an international quality theme park experience, right? And we did it ourselves. The team that was in that business, we did it ourselves. No, I don't want to devalue, the likes of Universal and stuff, but when I look at my friends that have opened Universal parks, and like Beijing, for example, fantastic people, really, really great people. But the beauty of opening Universal Beijing, for example, is you pull in a load of seconded talent from Universal, right? You have all that global resource to pull from.
Mm-hmm.
When we've opened Legoland parks before, there's 10 other Legoland parks. All those positions are duplicated. They can spare the team to, I'm just part of the Shanghai opening recently, and there was a whole wealth of Lego people there from all the other Lego parks around the globe. Thinking, you're having a great holiday. It's that resource is absolutely fantastic, and I've been there before. My Merlin days. When I was part of that team. I reopened York Dungeon, and I was that resource from another business coming in to help that business. And same with a project I did in Germany. But when we did Genting Sky Wars, we had nobody. We were our own park and our own business. We didn't have any other resources to pull on other than ourselves. And I think what we delivered from day one in that park, it wasn't perfect, don't get me wrong, right? And but I know hand on heart that we did absolutely the best we could have done with what we had and the challenges that we'd faced, and the team were incredible. We literally we did it ourselves. Now I was speaking to one of them the other week, and who's now in Saudi, and I was saying, just don't forget what we did in. Don't forget what we did in Malaysia, right? We did all that ourselves. Nobody can take that away from you. We absolutely phenomenal. With the resource that we have and the challenges that we were up against. Coming out from the back end of COVID. Delayed attractions and on all sorts of restrictions on opening. It was damn good. So yeah, you're only as good as your team. Only as good as your team.
No, absolutely.
I
Cool.
I was gonna say, I think so often too, Greg, like that, people say like Universal or Disney does it this way, and you could probably throw in like the Kadia project now too, because some people just will spend so much money to get you to certain places. Their pockets are so deep, but so many other, I'd say a majority of the people I work with, I'm sure you too, have very finite amounts of money they can work with, and getting you delivering kind of a world-class product that competes with those other ones, but on a very different budget scale and different expectations is really interesting.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. You have to have that culture in place. You have to have that skill set in your team that understands what world class is, and understands what standards are. Because one of the challenges I've found in Asia in particular is that you can talk to people, you can educate them, you can say and demonstrate to them what you get you think you've got the message across, and they'll nod and they'll agree. You'll go back and the next day we're doing something completely different, right? But I thought that's what you meant, boss. And it's like, it's hard, right? It's really difficult. You have to have people that are on that journey with you, that are on the same wavelength, that understand what they need to do, what they need to bring to the table to make it happen, And I've been really fortunate in all the businesses I've worked in that we've had those people and we've developed those people, especially the local talent. I mean that's our job, right? That's when you're an expat like me, that's one of your primary roles is to go into these businesses and to make it happen, right? And then your legacy is the people that you've shown how to make it happen, that hopefully they continue to make it happen, and then they pass that down to their colleagues, and they make it happen when they go on to the next best thing. So it's really rewarding to see that happen.
That's brilliant. And have you got any advice, or have you found a really effective way to maintain consistency once that buzz fades and it goes into sort of normal operation after that, and the kind of newness as well? Have you found anything that really helps teams keep going, keeps that motivation, keeps that passion there? Have you got any advice for anyone in a similar situation?
Do you know what I always said to my team, and this came from Merlin actually, but it's common sense, be in your business, right? Be in your business as much as you can be in your business. Walk the park, walk the attraction, walk the museum, see it, and if make time to do that, schedule time on your calendar and your diary to make that happen when people can't block out that time. I used to go into my at Genting, I had a fantastic portfolio. I had 2 theme parks, cable cars, FECs, bowling alleys, VR attractions, outdoor attractions, nature attractions. I had a whole portfolio of experiences, and I would make the time to go into as many of those as I possibly could, every week that I was in work. For me, those were my office, right? That was my office, and then you take the time to walk with your team, walk with your colleagues, to look at what was happening, to point out things that maybe could be better, right? To celebrate things that you're doing really well, and that's something that's always been really effective for me. Sitting in a boardroom or in a meeting room and telling people what's wrong is, it's doom and gloom, right? Go around and show people what could be better, educate them with a tangible experience, and if you have the opportunity, go visit other attractions, theme parks that do it, that you consider to do really well.
Mm-hmm.
Invest in your team, give them that exposure so that they can see it firsthand, the kind of level of experience and quality of operations that you want to bring back to your business. It's out there already, and you can go find it. Equally you can find the bad, right? And I've been there and I've seen it, but I say the bad. I've been in this industry, long enough now that even when you think you're doing really well, sometimes you do have bad days, right? And you don't always please, and you don't always give the best possible service because stuff happens that's out of your control, So I'm always quite forgiving when I see something that I don't think's quite right. Although I was in Japan last week, and I was at a park. I won't say which one it was, but their operations were absolutely shocking. They were safe, they were fantastically safe, but they were shocking. And also, what absolutely amazed me was for a park that was essentially a cash business and a pay-per-ride business, right, to have such poor capacity on a signature attraction. When I remember the days when Blackpool Pleasure Beach was pay-per-ride, and back in the day, Jeffrey Thompson would be like, if those ticket desks weren't, the barriers weren't spinning, those pounds weren't coming in, you weren't doing your business right. You need to be taking the money when the money's there to be taken. And this park in particular, the money was there to be taken, but there was an hour queue for a ride that probably should have a 15-minute queue. And I think how much more money you could be taking if you were just getting these people through this ride, right? It was so easy to do, so easy to fix. I just wanted to go up there and just, yeah. Great team. They were fantastic, smiley people, but I'm thinking, oh my God, right? Absolutely appalling. Yeah, so frustrating. As an operator, it's so frustrating.
Yeah. And I think I could do a whole episode on in Japan, the Disney properties and everybody else, because it is such a difference between how a lot of the local parks operate versus Disney. It's really interesting culturally.
But there's no excuse for it. I mean, I went another park, Harikata Park, I think it was. I've probably said it really wrong. Absolutely fell in love with it. It reminded me of like the parks you find in like Scandinavia. It was on the side of a mountain, gorgeous pine trees and stuff, and really nice Intamin wooden coaster, and some debatable steel coasters locally made. They were great in their own right, but the proposition was absolutely fantastic, and they were really pushing people through the rides really well. So it's like, well, how can you be doing it so well? I mean, I guess Universal Japan's on the doorstep, right? But then the other park was in Tokyo, which is 30 minutes from Tokyo Disney Resort. It's like the examples there for you, how for you to see how to do it. It's literally on your doorstep. Why you're not doing it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of segues really nice into the next question. What do you think, from an operator perspective, with new operators going into maybe new regions or opening a new venture? What do you think is one thing that they often underestimate when they're going into it?
Oh, do you know what? I remember when we opened Motion Gate at Dubai Parks and Resorts, right? And we'd built I think it's a truly fantastic theme park, right? The guys there, the creative guys and the procurement guys got absolutely nailed it with the attraction types that we had, the attraction models that we had, and the themed environments that we built. I mean, the DreamWorks box was absolutely fantastic, and I used to think this is world class, right? And then you'd then meet people in the park and they'd go, well, where's your big scary thrill rides, right? And I'm thinking, well, we've got these fantastic, that's boring, oh, what about this one? Oh, it goes too slow, right? And you can build this world-class product with fantastic show attractions, and really good solid rides that are, from somebody that's done a lot of rides and been to a lot of parks. I know what's good and I know what's not so good. Build some really good solid attractions. But you kind of missed the mark with the local expectation. You could have literally put in some traveling rides and that were scary and fast, and they would have absolutely loved it. They didn't appreciate traveling through hearing the story of how Shrek and Fiona got together, right? They didn't want to know that it was going too slow for them, right? Or flying through the Burke on How to Train Your Dragon was like, when does it go fast? It's like we spent millions on that. Why don't you like it? What's wrong with it? You've got no idea this is what's gone into this ride, and it's like But I think that applies to that applies across all the things we do. You invest a lot of time and effort and money into developing experiences, and you do the market research and you do the focus groups and you do the previews and stuff, and sometimes how you think your consumer's going to respond to it is not necessarily how they actually respond to it. They want different things from it, and that happens a lot in the Asian market. I mean, a lot of the back in the day, like for example when Universal Singapore opened, Revenge of the Mummy indoor premierized coaster, fantastic ride, right? But nobody would go on it. you know. And now when you, even to this day, now when you go to the entrance to that ride, you know, the staff have got signs up, indoor roller coaster, roller coaster, roller coaster, right? Because again, that's such an international park with audiences from all over Asia and the world, that actually you know, there's people that haven't been on a roller coaster before, right? And you don't want to put them in a scenario where they think, oh, it's, you know, it's a show inside the box, right? And they see all this immersive queue and they get in this ride vehicle that starts off really slow, goes through the show, and then obviously then starts launching you all over the place, you know, and then they hate you for it. So, you know, it's, you know, what we think is great, you know, it doesn't always translate that well in other cultures, in other countries. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, you know, you sometimes you get it right. Sometimes, you know, again, going back to Motion Gate, I remember, you know, one of the products that really responded really well to the local audience was Smurfs. You know, they loved it. And I'm thinking when we were opening, I think that was going to be our weakest IP, you know, but for the local clientele, it was one of the strongest IPs. They loved it. Absolutely loved it. So you don't always know, you know, and then, you know, the trick is then to, if it hasn't gone as planned, if they aren't responding as well as they should be, you know, you're quickly thinking, well, actually, what can we do to make it work, right? Is it an education thing? Is it signage? Is it, you know, is it show related? You know, you'll remember, Mark. You remember, like, you know, Subterra, Nemesis Subterra, Alton Towers. I was working for Merlin at the time, and I'd been at a conference at the park, and you know, that ride was an ABC. You know, it was 4 drop rides inside, you know, inside a show box that you know, you start at load levels at the top and you drop into the basement. And on paper, it was great concept. You know, you literally go in Subterra. And I remember that they'd value engineered that project when they were building it. They cut out a whole kind of maze scare attraction at the end of the ride, and then they'd opened it, and the feedback was not so great, you know. So at the time I was there, it was closed for a week or 2 weeks, and they were adding in the very stuff that they had cut out before they launched the ride in the first place, to kind of give it that scary finale, because it just wasn't ticking the boxes that they needed it to tick, you know, with the audience and with what they'd sold to the consumer. So yeah, that's an example of how you then go in and fix it.
It's such a tricky one as well, isn't it? Because I think nowadays culture changes so fast, and it's only becoming, every single year it changes quicker and quicker. And these projects that we're talking about are many times 5, 6, 10, 15 years in advance of kind of happening.
Yeah.
And trying to get ahead of that trend to find out where a culture is going to be such a hard thing for anyone to do, no matter how expert you are at marketing or kind of analytics.
Yeah.
It's so hard to find where these cultural changes are going to be. And it makes it really difficult, doesn't it, from an operator's perspective to kind of get ahead of the curve.
Absolutely does. And then that's why pop-up attractions are so successful, right? Because you can turn them around really quickly, you know. And you know, you look like, there's a fantastic example at Universal Japan now. You know, they've got their Space Fantasy coaster, that beautiful mat. I don't know whether you've done it. It's a Mack ride indoor spinning coaster. The original version of that ride was fantastic. It was all going through all the galaxies with the stars, and you spin, and it was absolutely beautiful ride, and a beautifully engineered ride. And then, you know, over time, it kind of lost popularity, and now they reskin it. You know, they reskin it, like literally, I don't know. I rode it the other week, and it was something completely different to what I rode, you know, a year and a half ago. It was all anime kind of themed with the latest anime trend in Japan, you know, with actually really good VR. I mean, I don't like VR on coasters, but I have to say this VR on the coaster was fantastic. But you know, it was, you know, it ticked that box mark, right? It made that it made that attraction relevant to the audience of today, you know, and no doubt, you know, when I go back next year, it will be skinned in as something else, you know, because that's a ride now that they've realized they can do that with it quite easily, and they'll continue to do that, you know, and it gives them something new to shout about.
Absolutely. And the kind of last question that I want to ask you is, have you got any advice for anybody who's stepping into an operational role, maybe at a new park, a new venture? Have you got one piece of advice that you would like to give anyone in that position?
Oh God, yeah. Do your research, right? Do your research. Understand the market, understand the business, understand the market, understand the opportunities that are available to you, right? Because there are so many in this industry. You know, what's your passion? You know, how can you align something that is going to make you happy going into work every day? You know, if you're a fresh grad, you know, get on the grad schemes. You know, do weekend work. Just get yourself into the business. You know, often the easiest way into the business is doing part-time work or doing the summer season in your local theme park, right? Get yourself in there, understand the roles that are available, understand, you know, the operational side of the business or the marketing side or the F&B side, whatever it is that, you know, takes your fancy, you know, and work really hard to get noticed, you know, and to be that champion of the business that delivers the service standards and delivers the experience that business expects you to do, you know, and is positive and, you know, brings ideas and, you know, but brings realistic ideas. You know, we all know a lot of people in the kind of like, I mean, I'm an enthusiast, but, you know, you meet some enthusiasts that are very extreme enthusiasts, and, you know, they love to come and tell you how to make your park operate better and what you're doing wrong, right? And then sometimes they've got absolutely, you know, no idea of the reality of the business you're trying to run, right? And the challenges that you're facing on a day-to-day basis, you know. So don't try and be one of those people. You know, be a bit more grounded, a bit more realistic, and you know, yeah, that's one way in. Obviously, there's, you know, I mean, I know a lot of people in a lot of different positions, and, you know, I know people in creative that have obviously done their art degrees and they've worked their way up the ladder and, you know, got to some quite senior positions in, you know, Imagineering or Universal Creative, whatever, and then you know, or Disney, you know, and they're doing really well, you know, and they've you know, worked really hard at that, you know, worked really hard. They've understood the proposition, they've understood the task at hand, and they've made a name for themselves, you know. Yeah,
That's great advice.
I'm not sure it's the right advice, but it's advice. I mean, I was really lucky. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, and I met people along my journey that kind of took me along with them, and then obviously I've paid that back and I've taken people along with me, and, you know, and given them the opportunities that I was given. So I'm very lucky.
And I think that makes sense, though, because our industry, just like you started out saying, there's so many different roles and we're global that there's no one playbook. And I do think that whether it's mentorship or, you know, just offering advice, taking people under your wing for people that have been in the industry like we all have for a while, to help younger people who want to succeed but may not know where to go, I think that's really important sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of like passing on the passion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Passing on the passion. I mean, you know, but you also have to be realistic and you know, and respect the fact that for some people in the business, you know, it's just a job, right? It's they go there to work, but, you know, still do your best to try and get them infused the why you're working in such a special place, and, you know, why it's different to working at that place over there, you know, and make it as special as it can be for them, you know. But, you know, I look back at, you know, the people I've worked with and I've worked for, and I see where they are today, and I'm, you know, yeah, incredibly proud, yeah, of some of the people that I've had on my team and have now gone on to do some really, really good stuff. Yeah, and jealous as well. Well, not jealous, that's not the wrong word. And envious, because, you know, they're doing it at a much younger age than I started, you know. So, and also, you know, the industry's evolved so much that there's the stuff that they get to play with now is completely different to the stuff that I got to play with like 25 years ago. The technology, you know, you know, you know, back in the day, if you're trying to do like a scare. I remember when we did my first scare attraction was at Blue Planet. We did Spooky Planet, right? And, you know, the amount of stuff that we you know, the spotlights that we put the film across in front, you know, we didn't have the LED lights back then. It was all, you know, they just didn't have the stuff that you've got today, right? Which makes things so much easier and more spectacular. Yeah.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been great to hear about your journey and where you are now. We're now going to move into the fast pass round, and we know that this is not easy to answer, especially for somebody like yourself who goes around to attractions and goes on rides all of the time. But let's just see how you get on with it.
All right, Greg. So can you tell us? I know you've been around the world. What would be one of your favorite rides that you've been on?
Yeah, impossible question. Do you know what? I'm a kind of a dark ride fan, really. I'm an experience fan, so I like rides that are hybrid. Bring all different elements of technology and show and stuff. So I love attractions. A bit cliche, but I love attractions like, for example, Pirates of the Caribbean at Disney Shanghai. I love it. Mystic Manor in Hong Kong. One of my favorite attractions. Oh my god, I've lost my train of thought, guys. Um, I was gonna say Phantasialand, but that's also one of my favorite parks as well. So they kind of the two wrap in, they kind of merge into
That's
each
fine.
other.
That's fine.
Yeah, they kind of merge into each other. I just, I think those are the kind of you can see where I'm going with this, right? Those are the kind of experiences
Yeah.
that I like, So that's kind of something that's really immersive and fun and entertaining and kind of pushes the boundaries. And I think those rides in particular have done that in recent times. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you go to a park like Phantasialand, where it's sort of hard to tell where the ride stops and the theming
Oh God.
starts and vice versa, and then that goes into the land where it just like when I saw the Terran area for the first time, it is amazing, and I do love that when sort of it feels. It doesn't feel like someone just built it on a parking lot, right? It feels like
Yeah,
someone put a lot of thought into tell a story
yeah.
with all of these different elements and bringing them together.
Do you know what? When we were doing Genting Skywars, that was one of my benchmark parks. Right, I used to refer people to that park all the time, and I sent people there actually, and said go and look at this from an F&B perspective, from an entertainment perspective, from just a pure immersive experience perspective. It kind of ticks all those boxes, and it's like truly world class product for privately owned business. It's delivering experiences on par with Disney and Universal, the world leaders. So it's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've answered the second question as well. So we're going to ask you the final question, which is, what is a key trend you think is going to happen within the themed attraction world?
Do you know what? I'm gonna say something that's probably you're not going to expect, but I'm going to say AI, and I'm not. When I say that, I'm not particularly talking about the front end, the kind of the user, the consumer experience. I'm talking more about kind of just what AI is going to do for us as a business, right? From the operations side, from the business side of it. I mean, I'm using AI every day now in the work that I do, but just from automating routine tasks to really understanding the detail into what's happening in your park, looking at statistical data, analyzing trends in ride maintenance or ride operations. I think what that brings to the table and the speed at which it brings to the table is an absolute game changer. I don't think there's a day that goes by now where kind of something happens in the world of AI that really kind of amazes me and makes me think, oh God, that would be really good if we applied it to that, right? Or we used it in that way in our industry. So I think that's what I'm gonna settle on. Yeah, not necessarily about the front end experience, or it has relevance for that as well, obviously. But from the business side of it, the operator side of it, the back of house side of running the business, and which ultimately, obviously brings considerable benefit to the guest as well, whether it's improved efficiency, operations, manpower requirements at certain times of the day, because AI is, done in minutes what, your HR department took months to do and tell you that you had too many headcount, right? It's kind of that kind of stuff really that's going to revolutionize our industry as it will revolutionize most industries out there. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. Cause I think people, there's so much bullshit on the front end of AI conversations, but I think when you get through it and actually do what you're doing and apply it to very specific business cases, we're going to see a lot of things that maybe are not sexy guest forward things, but can allow us, whether it's just make money easier or aggregate data easier, that we haven't had that opportunity before. I think that's where certainly AI is going to have a big impact on us.
Absolutely. And then, there's pros and cons, there'll be sacrifices on the back of that. You might carry less headcount in your business because AI is doing things that, your revenue management team were doing previously, or your business analytics team were doing, but there's opportunities as well that, you, like you just said, it can point you in a direction that maybe, other people haven't, your traditional team haven't seen before, and do it a lot quicker as well. So, yeah. I think, if you can apply it to safety, I remember talking to my friends at Disney and looking at some of the stuff that they were using AI for, in particular ride safety, right? And having AI sit as that second person in command, right, in an OCC, watching ride operations for you, especially dark rides. You look at rides like It's a Small World, right? And you've got all those multiple boats, right? Those RVs on the system at one time, all full of passengers, right? Having AI through the cameras, watching that environment, knowing how to spot a jumper jumping out of the boat, that's priceless technology. You capture it and you deal with it and you react to it so much quicker than a traditional OCC where you've got your operator with all the banks of screens and they're having to scan through constantly to watch for anything that's out of the ordinary. We were looking at it in Sun Group. We were looking at it from a lifeguard perspective, obviously not to replace traditional lifeguards, but to have that facility to look at the water and to look at, suspicious activity, right? To be that second pair of eyes. I think, when you start to apply it in that respect, the opportunities are endless. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Greg. It's been awesome talking to you. We appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. I enjoyed talking to you guys. It's been a nice, it's been really enjoyable. Thank you so much.
And where can people find what you're doing right now online? LinkedIn, company website? What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, just go to LinkedIn. Yeah, go to LinkedIn and have a look at that. I need to update it. Actually, you just reminded me. I need to update it. So I will update. Yeah, I will update.
Awesome. Well, you can find Greg on LinkedIn while he's updating his profile. Mark's there too. I'm on Instagram at Rollercoaster Sales Guy. As always, thank you to our friends at blooloop for sponsoring and hosting us, and we will see you soon with another episode.